Okay, let's get started. Thank you for coming out. Thank you, Victor, for maintaining our gentleman's agreement for the open bar at every event we do. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Interactive Media Peer Group of the Television Academy. The Interactive Media Peer Group, is dedicated to the advancement of television in all of its many forms, and right now that's really specifically focusing on VR and AR in a big way. My co-governor, Mark Johnson, is here. Stand up, Mark, you handsome devil. If you want to know more about joining the peer group, please come up to Mark or me afterwards. We have an amazing group here tonight. This is a free-form discussion. This is one of my favorite things to do. Thanks to Victor, we just really have a discussion with some really smart people off the record about the state of the industry. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Before I do, I want to say we have I have a little bit of an announcement. We have an alpha of a project which you can all go check out, which is called VRARproject.com. It's something that I started at USC about 3 years ago. It started as a white paper that Andrea, stand up, Andrea, you handsome devil. That Andrea and I, a former student of mine, did about 3 years ago. We wrote this white paper on the state of the industry, and we interviewed Ted and Aaron Koblin and a bunch of really smart people, and by the time we finished it, it was completely worthless and outdated. So then the next year we did it again, and this year we did it with about 12 people, and I think it's actually pretty good. So you can download it, and the idea is that this paper will migrate into becoming a searchable database of companies, projects, resources, and initiatives. It's completely free. It's just a complete open source project. Thank you. So we're going to see where it goes. And we have a bunch of great advisors like Ted and Eric here, and we're trying to figure out how to create something that's valuable to all of us. Did you not know that? Well, you do now. Anyway, go to VRARproject.com. Just put your email address. It's totally free. You can download it. It's about, 300 pages or something. It's good. Okay, let's get started. I'm particularly happy that Maureen is here because, give her a hand. One of the real trailblazers in as a creative and as a CEO. So why don't we start talking about Baobab, and we'll just go down the line. Do we have audio on everybody?
Yep. So, hi everyone. I'm CEO co-founder of Baobab Studios, a leading VR animation studio. How many of you guys have seen Invasion with the bunnies and the aliens? Awesome. Success. Okay. So that's one of the top downloaded VR experiences out there across the platforms, starring Ethan Hawke, and that premiered at Tribeca last year. And we also released Asteroids, starring Elizabeth Banks, which premiered at Sundance this year. And we just announced Rainbow Crow, starring John Legend as the main character, and that just premiered the prologue at Tribeca and just showed at Cannes Film Festival as well. So really excited. Also, just in general, very excited about VR as a storytelling medium. There were a lot of naysayers in the beginning that said, storytelling can't be done in VR. But Roth Kirschenbaum is actually partnering with us to turn Invasion into a feature-length film, and it was all inspired from the VR showing the storytelling potential of VR. So we're really excited to talk about any questions about storytelling VR animation today.
Awesome. Ted.
I'm a big fan of Maureen. We invested in her company. I guess I could say that. I work for 20th Century Fox. I'm the futurist at 20th Century Fox, which is an odd and interesting gig. And as I said before in the earlier talk that I was on, when you get to wake up and you ask yourself, do I have to do this or do I get to do this, right? And I'm in that camp, and I think you are too, and so is Eric, and I think probably everybody here, and this Eric too. So we all know each other. It's kind of an interesting club. I see some of the members of the clubhouse, like Phil right there in point position, and Seth is definitely a member of the clubhouse. It's really been a fun and interesting ride over the last couple of years to explore, to meet people, to try and help things move along, and to just have an open mind and say, I get to do this every day. It's pretty great. So that's what I like to do, and it's been fun to spend time with all you and learn and figure and hope for the best And I think just I'll make a comment about the VR AR project, which I think is genius. And yes, I did agree to be on the advisory board and help out. Because a lot of us, and some of us in this room, very often get the question of, okay, so you seem to be involved in VR. Tell me about VR. And you're like, oh, okay, where do I start, right? But to have a really good pointer, to be able to say, go here, read this for an hour, and then come back and we'll talk intelligently about some of the things that you're interested in, rather than, let me tell you about what VR is and how it all works and why it all works, and then of course AR, around the next corner. So I'm pretty enthused about it, Seth. I think it's gonna be great.
Thank you. And Ted's really being too modest, because in terms of VR and Hollywood, he has been clearly the leader in the studio system for really pushing things forward. So give Ted a hand, come on. Sorry, Eric. Sorry about that, Eric.
No, absolutely, amen. But just sitting here next to him, I'm just like, wow, it's 3 years of front seat on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so much change, so fast, and it's been so much fun. I'm Eric Shamlin. I'm managing director of a company called Secret Location. We have a slightly different backstory in that we started as basically a digital agency 8 or 9 years ago. Like many people, 4 years ago, or with the baited, Oculus Kickstarter, we picked up the DK1 and tried to figure out what you can do with it, basically. And we were lucky to partner with Fox to do a really cool activation at Comic-Con in 2014.
Yeah, we cut people's heads off in VR. It's
Yeah.
great. We could tell you amazing stories. See, I'm already going free form about the early days of Oculus and how terrified they were.
Yeah.
when we were going to say, well,
You're
what we want
doing
to do
what?
is actually decapitate people. They're like, we don't think that's a good idea.
No.
We're like, we know it's not a good idea. That's why we want to do it.
We can't authorize that with the DK1 like this. So
we did it.
Yeah, we did it, and it was a huge success for Fox and for ourselves. I think for a lot of companies, we were like, okay, well, that was fun. We'll go back to our sort of day jobs. But the phone didn't stop ringing, and it's just been a crazy last few years of basically pivoting the whole business into VR 24/7. And then about a year ago, we were acquired by a company called Entertainment One, which is a big international distribution company, and they basically told us to sort of shed the service work and focus on original IP. I head up the content team. We have two teams. I'm on the content team, and then we also have a platform team. And the platform team now is the backbones behind a lot of the big publishers in the space. So it's a white label distribution platform that we're selling around town. And then in the content space, we've got a portfolio approach of VR games and then VR narratives that we're pursuing right now. So.
And relative to the peer group, he glossed over it, but Eric's project was the first project to win an Emmy for VR. So.
I'm Eric Darnell, the other Eric, and I work with Maureen. I'm the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Baobab. It's been really a fascinating journey these last couple of years at our tiny little startup company. I'd heard about VR. It always sounded cool to me. You could talk about VR all day, but Maureen did the right thing when a mutual friend introduced us, and she just brought a headset and said, "Put this on." And I realized you cannot describe it the way you can experience it. It is absolutely indescribable and an experience that's unique to any other medium. That said, I came from almost 20 years of feature filmmaking, doing directing and writing for animated features, and I kind of thought, I got this, piece of cake, right? Well, I quickly learned that VR isn't just an extension of filmmaking and cinema. It really is a brand new medium, and we're really all babes in the woods right now, and discovering this brand new medium, this brand new language, this black box of tools that we don't even know what's inside. And so it kind of reminds me of, I got involved in computer animation back in the early mid-'80s, and it reminds me of that time again, where nobody knows what they're doing and there's so much to be discovered. And so it's been a pretty exciting 18 to 24 months. We'll see what happens.
And Eric is being humble and didn't say that he was the co-writer and director of all 4 Madagascar films. So.
Yeah.
And ants.
Wow. Okay. So I have unknowingly been doing VR since 2000. I was told the other day that a project I did, we did a virtual fashion show for Alexander McQueen. It used volumetric capture technology and VR without us actually realizing. So we built the rig that ended up being used for the bullet time effect in The Matrix. So I've been exploring through my studio Valis the idea of capturing performance and human beings and putting them into a volumetric room scale environment for a long time. So I've been waiting for VR without realizing that it existed up until maybe 3 years ago. And I did the whole 360 video route. I've directed projects for Weaver, Anthony, who's the invisible man next to me right now. I've done a couple of projects for them. I did a Run the Jewels video for the New York Times, which is also in the Transport platform. I also had the misfortune of directing the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue in VR, which was a horrible job, obviously. These very intelligent models on a beach in the Dominican Republic. So that was actually sold, and it was on the cover of Sports Illustrated last year, and they gave away 500,000 pairs of glasses. So I've had varying degrees of success and creativity with 13 different VR projects right now. So we're focusing primarily on bringing human beings into this experience and looking at new technologies to actually capture performance.
Excellent. So there's a lot of stuff to get into with all of you. I know Eric Darnell, you have to leave a little bit early, so let's start there. And is the SL video, that's you guys, Maureen? SL video?
That would be mine.
Oh, that's you.
Secret
Okay, so
location.
did I get one from you? Oh, Tribeca is you guys. Why don't I show this and then we can chat for a little bit. Can you bring the house lights down a little bit?
We see virtual reality as a new medium for telling stories and creating great cinematic experiences that are character-driven. It allows people to be taken to places and to worlds that otherwise wouldn't exist.
Rainbow is a Native American story of selflessness and service. Now, we at Rainbow are retelling this ancient legend, and we're telling it in a brand new way at VR.
Long ago, in a time before humans walked the face of the earth, the world was always sunny and warm, and the forest animals lived happily without worry. But then one day the snow came. The animals were no longer happy. And they began to worry they would freeze to death in this increasingly frigid world. What they needed was a hero. What they needed was Rainbow Crow.
So, So it's a tremendous response when you guys did this. It launched at Tribeca recently, same as there was when you did Invasion at Tribeca last week. You guys want to talk about sort of the evolution of this? And before we do, I want to say I was actually at Disney a long time ago as an overseeing games production, and I had the honor of working with Glenn Keane, who you guys work with as well, who is, Glenn Keane is sort of the living master of high quality, I don't know, painterly animation, and I was really lucky to talk to him during the making of Tarzan, and his approach to sort of using art standards or using compositional techniques, using technology to create, to aspire to a certain artistic look. It feels to me like Baobab really does that in this medium, so I was also curious about that.
Yeah, it's a big part of what we're trying to do is, we're doing animation. So what that means is that on some headsets, we can deliver that animation in real time. It can change as you, the viewer, react to it. Characters can respond to what you may do in their world. And it's very different than a character like in a movie looking at the camera and breaking the fourth wall, as we say it. In VR, when you feel like you're really in this world, when the character looks you in the eye, it's like they're acknowledging that you actually exist in their world and can react and respond to you, and both emotionally and physically. So it's a whole different kind of experience than you would ever have in watching a movie in a movie theater where you're not expected or imagine that there's anything you could do. And then, we were also taking cues from theater with Rainbow Crow in the sense that we don't have to create reality. We can create our own alternate reality, a world that would never be able to exist in the real world. It's something, again, that animation allows us to do. So the world of Rainbow Crow is dithered and soft, and these shapes feel special and unique and almost like what it might feel like to walk into your favorite storybook as a kid. And we can use lighting theatrically to direct the eye as we use characters. And you mentioned composition, and it's kind of our idea to sort of direct the viewer's eye to find the compositions that perhaps you might be looking for if you were shooting a film. But the viewer sort of naturally finds those. They're directed by a character's glance or a sound that you hear out of your field of view. And these are all things that kind of make this VR experience completely different. And it's a word that's used over and over again, immersion, but it makes it feel like you are really, truly there. And so, Invasion and Asteroids, they all have their kind of own unique sort of style and design, and Rainbow Crow has its own unique style and design. And it's sort of an approach that we think is really cool because it gives you an experience that could be like a dream. It brings out your sense of wonder. It takes you to some place that you could never go in reality.
So in terms of creative thesis, I oftentimes get asked, are you making a game? Are you making a film? What is it? And I don't really like to answer that because I say VR is its own medium. So there's an analogy that Eric actually came up with about a little girl crying on a park bench. If you see a little girl who's too young to be crying on a park bench by herself, let's say Central Park, and you're seeing that in a movie, you feel really bad for her, but you don't do anything about it, right? You're not going to get out of your seat because you don't actually believe she's there. If it's in a game, you talk to her because you want to win or get information to get to the next level, but it's very ego-driven. And if it's in real life, you see a little girl, you would hopefully talk to her because you actually are worried about her and care about her and want to help her. So the vision for us for VR is, can you have the empathy of films where you care so much for this character, the agency of games where you can actually do something about your caring, but the reason you do it is because of the motivations that you have in real life, where you do it because you genuinely care about these characters, not because you're trying to win and you're thinking about, what does the game maker want me to do? In these bigger than life dramatic story arcs. And that's something that I think only VR can allow us to do. So right now with the vision, the idea is VR can get you to care about the characters in a way you couldn't otherwise in a film because the characters are interacting with you. So in our pieces, we try to explore, who are you as the audience? In the first one, you are a little bunny. In Asteroids, you are a menial task robot that's even more interactive. In Rainbow Crow, I can't tell you because it would spoil it, but you're really cool. You interact with the environment in a different way, and hopefully you care so much about these characters that you want to help them.
I would agree. What I would say, spending a lot of time with Eric and Maureen, and knowing a lot about the essence of their company, is what they're doing probably better than most in the medium, because the medium, as it stands now, is in its technological life, right? So people are focusing on the technological capabilities of what it can do and the mechanics and the physics. And what they're focusing on is that it's a medium for magic, that it's a better magic than anything that has come before it, because you're increasing the capabilities of the visual experience. And their focus, I mean, it's overused, but their focus is on that magical story connection, that empathetic, emotional connection of joy, when you can actually be closer into that characterization than you could ever get on a movie screen. And if you look at who's the best of the best at doing it on a movie screen, I would find it, you'd probably have a hard argument to say that it's Pixar, that Pixar is the one that has done it the best, that has found that emotional connection. But they're still stuck on a screen that's a ways from you. And what they're doing is specializing in a better screen, a more connected experience. So we're quite enthused about where it goes and where it's going to go from here.
I had that same, Maureen was kind enough to show me Asteroids before we came in, and I had that exact experience of, there's a character that goes through this arc and has an unfortunate event, and your heart goes out. I don't know if I would not have had that same experience if it was not in an immersive environment. I felt like I'd had this enough interaction with the character, and it sounds like gesturally, you were actually, this is fascinating, you were sort of modeling my haptic responses and then building them into storyline. So I did have this emotional response with the characters, and so then when one of them had, some bad luck, my heart kind of went out to them. It's something you could never do in another medium.
You can use a lot of techniques in science, honestly. If the other characters can react to you, you just observe human behavior. So if two people are on a date and they're getting along really well, you notice that they start mirroring each other's actions. Like if you do this and then the guy also does this, but they don't know they're actually doing it. It's something that we subconsciously do to show that we're connected with somebody. So in Asteroids, we actually have the other characters mimic your movement slightly without you even knowing it, which helps build the connection with that character.
There's a great study that was done at Stanford where they took a computer animated character and basically gave a sales pitch. And in the test group, they just gave the sales pitch. But in the experiment group, this computer animated character was set up so that 4 seconds after the test, the test subject struck a different pose, crossed their legs, crossed their arms, changed their position, the computer animated character would mirror that. And what they found was that the majority of the test subjects had no idea that they were being copied, that they were being mirrored. They did if they did some crazy action, and then it was obvious. But for most of them, they didn't, and they had no idea. And they were 30% more likely to buy that guy's product. They were 30% more likely to like the salesman. And they had no idea. So this is something that we can do in virtual reality because we know something about the attitude of the viewer or the user, whatever term it is we come up with, the audience. We know where their hands are. We know the attitude of their head. And as time goes on, we're going to know even more about their body language. And we can use that, as we all do, consciously or subconsciously in our daily communication, to cement relationships, or perhaps to sever them, if that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, fascinating. Eric, maybe we'll talk a little bit about what you guys are doing. I don't know if the sci-fi thing is the best example of this, but I know that you've done some work which really involves the protagonist inside the story in very specific ways. So maybe I'll show this
you can show
piece,
the clip.
and then we'll go from there. Okay, so if you could lower the lights a little bit, and we'll show secret location.
Just lower the lights in general.
Very dark. I'm noticing how dark it is. But the project you're referring to was called Halcyon. It was probably a third of the reel. It's a kind of a sci-fi story that we did in partnership with Sci-Fi International or Sci-Fi Channel, and it debuted last October, I believe. And yeah, they came to us, asked us to pitch kind of a sci-fi idea. It was actually sort of pre-VR in a sense that they came to us and wanted us to shoot like an interstitial series because television airtime has become so expensive to pilot new projects that they had this opportunity abroad to pilot a short form narrative in sort of interstitial windows when they would usually fill windows with promo or music videos or whatever. And we pitched them an idea on a sci-fi.
So you're glossing over. That's really a fascinating example. So obviously, if you're in the TV business, the U.S. domestic business is very different from the European business because we have a certain spot volume, which is really high relative to Europe. And so if this format went domestically over there, then there were these extra minutes.
Yeah, to get into, they broadcast traditional American formats, 22 and 44 minutes typically, but in most of the European markets, they can't fill that extra time with ad content. There's more regulations around about how much ads you can have in an hour.
Can you hear him okay, by the way? Okay, good.
And so there's usually this 5 or 6 minute gap, and they usually put promos or music videos, but because airtime is so expensive and piloting new shows is so expensive, they wanted to try and see if they could promo a new show using these 6 minute gaps. And so we pitched them an idea that's now a 1 hour pilot, but that could also be broke up into 6 minute sort of chapters. And that was the basic idea. But we sort of, flipped the idea and said, well, let's try and do a VR story as well. And the basic idea is the first murder happens in VR, so it's this crime story that on the broadcast show you would watch the crime unfold in the detective story. But then, since the crime happened in VR, we could actually recreate the crime, by downloading his memories from the VR headset, sort of say. And so it's this really fun hybrid 16:9 linear TV show that sort of cuts from that to a VR crime scene. So it pushes you to experience the crime scene. And so on an Oculus, you can do both. You can sort of toggle between the two, but on broadcast, you could just watch the linear thing, and they were meant to sort of live, by themselves if they had to. But on Oculus, it's actually a really fun experience to kind of go between the two. And so as far as we know, it's like the first time that had been done by a broadcaster. It's like this hybrid TV VR format. And now we're trying to spin that up into a full series and sort of knock on some wood. Let's see where that goes. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the other stuff that you're doing?
Right now, I'm hesitant to name names, but we have option to 2 novels or established works by very noted authors, and we're developing VR series around them. One is kind of a more of a live action volumetric take on a supernatural thriller, and then the second property is we're going to do, sort of paying homage to a lot of what Baobab's doing, trying to do a full interactive, like animated narrative in VR. That'll be a multi-part series that will release hopefully in the next 18 months, I hope, knock on wood. But then, the approach is sort of a portfolio approach. We've got those which are very much narrative driven, but we also think that the early adopters are going to be gamers. So the other quarter of the reel you saw was like a first-person shooter that we're launching this summer, and just to sort of build out that capability that as well. We do think there's kind of a hybridization of sort of toolkits and skill sets and language that sort of is happening right now, and so we wanted to make sure that we could do that as well and know that we can tell a linear story well, make use of haptics and interactivity and gamification and do that really well, and then use those 2 skill sets in sort of this hybrid that Maureen is talking about. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, since you mentioned volumetric, let's go to you, Peter. Peter's actually from New Jersey. Yeah, the whole thing is a
Fake
scam.
elocution.
Yeah.
New Jersey,
Hang on.
it's the best state in the entire nation. It's where I'm from.
Oh, are you?
Yes.
All right.
Oh,
Good
God.
deal. Well, I'm from Long Island, so I can't say anything. Let's show you a reel. Peter just did, so all jokes aside, Peter's been an amazing artist in space for a long time. He just did a great project with Smithsonian, which you could talk about, but does a lot of volumetric work, which if you could talk about that, and then we'll bring Ted into that conversation as well. So let's show a little bit of the Smithsonian project.
Oh, you don't have your other.
Wow, it's laggy.
It's frozen.
frozen?
Yeah. You look great though on that still. Thank you. That was awesome.
Intel approached my studio Dallas to put together a next level VR project. So I assembled
to leave the lights
an
like this, by the way.
8i
Need to be some-
volumetric capture. Brainstorm VR for
It's a great reel.
This is really good reel.
And X-res for photogrammetry.
My contribution to the project was creating this visual set for the museum environment. And we did this using laser scanning and photogrammetry.
So we didn't tell you it's a radio program that we were doing. It's no visuals at all. Yeah. Until they're getting into radio big
We'll try
time.
one more time. Might be
Yeah?
bad.
Listen, it's quick time.
Studio Dallas to put together a next level VR project. So I assembled an 8i full volumetric capture. Brainstorm VR for the Unity build and main interaction, and X-res for photogrammetry.
My contribution to the project was creating the digital set for the museum environment. And we did this using laser scanning and photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is creating 3D models from photographs. And we took thousands of photographs, and from these we were able to reconstruct all the surfaces inside the museum. Once we completed a game-ready version of the digital set, we were able to pass that on to Framestore to add the interactivity.
Framestore is a digital content studio. We've contributed to a lot of VR projects in the past, and Room Scale is definitely the higher tier of VR projects. At the beginning of the project, we were slightly concerned to have enough throughput to get all the assets from disk to the headsets. But thanks to Intel and Intel building us a custom machine featuring their Extreme Edition i7 and Xeon processors, we were able to get rid of that concern quite quickly and focus on the creative challenges.
So we chose a statue, which is the Adams Memorial, a painting, which is of the Aurora Borealis, and a video art installation by the American artist Alex Prager.
8i has created software that allows people to capture volumetrically the performance and be able to watch that or experience that by being able to walk around them in virtual reality and augmented reality.
We were really excited about this opportunity to do a director's commentary with Alex Prager for her Face in the Crowd experience. We captured her volumetrically, which allowed the user to really have presence with Alex. They were standing next to her while enjoying the experience. The way that we shoot her is a little bit complicated, but using an array of computers with those Intel processors has allowed us to capture that in a very simple way.
You actually just bring the lights back the way they were. I think it's bright. Can you just leave the lights? Yeah, that's better.
A happier place for all of us?
Yeah, that's a little. It's been a long day. So I don't know how many of you have seen the Smithsonian project, but there's a few really remarkable moments, especially I thought in terms of the quality of light, where you actually go into this experience and you're in the museum and then you travel into the world of a work and you really get that vertigo of not knowing what world you're in anymore. And I know you've done a lot of work at Volumetric, but could you just talk about the thought process for this project? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were approached by the Smithsonian to basically
move the mic up a little bit.
Replicate the museum experience. I mean, 95% of the Smithsonian's archive is hidden, you know, so they have a wealth of treasures that are not available to the general public. And they were like, how do we show people this? And how do we get people into the museum who can't physically travel? So we're like, okay, let's build you a new museum, which is actually the ultimate plan. So right now we're talking about virtualizing an entire building, and you can almost hollow port objects into your physical space. So what we tried to do, rather than just replicate, you know, a painting and you're looking at a painting, it's like, how do you step inside that painting? So we tried 3 different things. It was very much an R&D project. It wasn't a commercial release, although we are releasing it this summer now. So we took a painting of the Aurora Borealis, but as you step towards it, you're actually in a 4K time lapse in Iceland of the Northern Lights. And actually that's the vertigo-inducing moment when you look down and there's no ground, which we have to solve actually, because it's a bit of a problem. But that's everyone's favorite experience. And it's the idea of being able to time travel. It's a lot of sci-fi concepts actually that I'm using. So it's temporal, it's folding space, going back in time, forwards in time. So you're experiencing the origin story of each object in a way, rather than just reading a card, or hearing a little audio description, which is the normal museum experience. One of the other pieces we did was a statue. And I'm standing next to the curator from the museum, and they're telling me this incredible story, and I'm looking at the statue, and I'm like, I don't get it from looking at the statue. It's just a statue with a photograph and a card. And she's telling me the story about how it was this famous author, Henry James, built this statue to memorialize his wife, who was one of the first photographers in America in the mid-18th century. And she committed suicide by drinking the photochemicals that she used to process the photographs. And the original statue is actually in a cemetery nearby. So we went to the cemetery and we grabbed that photogrammetry, we captured it. So in the museum experience now, you step towards the statue and you're teleported into the graveyard. And emotionally, you feel the story of the object. It's not just a matter of, oh, I'm in a museum anymore. And then you step back, and you're back in the museum. So it's really trying to intensify and actually add storytelling to the museum experience. So the volumetric really works because you are walking around a space that feels like a real museum, but you're having different experiences with each piece.
Especially in that moment, I don't know what you thought of that one, but the quality of light when you actually go into that it's profound. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I thought it was extraordinary.
Oh yeah, it is. It's an extraordinary piece, and it's actually a funny and sort of interesting story because right next to where you and Greg were. So by the way, there's a guy named Greg who works with this company called X-Res, and he's a real pioneer in the industry.
Yeah, he built all the photogrammetry. Yeah.
It's remarkable to see the work he's done for an extended period of time and how good it is and how it continues to impress everybody that touches this stuff. So our connection was Intel sponsored your piece.
That's right.
And
we were neighbors.
We were neighbors. So one of the companies I'm involved in outside of Fox, because of my unusual role, I get to sort of dabble in lots of different things and help companies sort of come to life. And one of them is a volumetric company out of San Diego called Hype VR. And we're doing some really interesting and unusual things. And Intel sponsored a piece that you've seen in the headset, and a number of people have seen in the headset, and it's been shown, where you can actually walk around inside a live video sphere. So it's all of the things that everyone, and I imagine a lot of you have had challenges when you're looking at virtual reality that is photographic in nature or video in nature, and it's not truly spatial. It's just a video projection onto the screen so you can look around, but the minute you lean into something, it doesn't react the way you want it to, and it takes you out of the experience. Your body and your brain says, that's not exactly what it should do. So it's a problem that we're all trying to solve with videogrammetry and photogrammetry. So the interesting story is Intel came to the table and said, we want to actually help you guys do this. So the team went to Vietnam and shot this amazing waterfall that's like 12 hours from anywhere where you can get via road, and they'd carry all this 14 reds in a big sphere of reds and all this technology equipment. And then we showed it at the Mandalay Bay with the head of Intel, Brian. So the crazy story about this is they got 280, I think, full riff setups, all in this giant ballroom in the Mandalay Bay for press all around the world, full with computers and the trackers and the headsets. And when you're doing this kind of high-stakes thing with a big event like that at CES, you have to rehearse a bunch, right? So I explained what we're going to do with these 275 press in this room, all with full riffs, and that I'm going to actually ask them to get up and move around. And all of the tech staff was like, no, you can't do that. That's way too dangerous. There's wires everywhere and there's stuff. And just if you want, you can like have them like stand up a little bit and lean around to see it. And I said, oh yeah, fine, okay. So I was a really good citizen. Every rehearsal we do. And then when the real thing comes up and Brian and I are on stage, I totally go off the rails and everybody stands up and I say, so you see what it is and you see that it's not just video, you can move around this video. Would you like to try that? And you could see the 8 people in the back of the room, all the tech staff going, don't do it. like, so go ahead and stand up and go ahead and like take a few steps around. And they were like, and it's a really funny YouTube video. You can find it if you search for it, of all these people in headsets all at the same time, all like walking around and almost bumping into each other and killing each other, but they don't. And we got through it, and it was quite a moment. And then throughout CES, we showed it side by side. So we showed the piece, and it was.
And
really
actually,
cool.
you know, I mean, what Ted's talking about, his technology is volumetric video. So what we were doing is capturing stills, and he's capturing actual video, which is so heavy computing, and it's, I mean, it's approximation of a light field, you know, and that's what we all need to make this real.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what you were saying, Seth, it's that moment where it feels real to you.
You forget.
Yeah.
You forget that you're in an experience. There's actually a moment in the Hype VR. Is it an NFL one?
Yeah, the new one they did was it's pseudo NFL. We went down to La Jolla and shot a high school.
So there's like a not a tunnel or a conduit. There's this moment. So you're actually in a 3D space, volumetrically captured, and you're moving around. But then. Is it, what is that, is it a tire or something? You drop
there's
down
a bunch
and
of
then.
tires and there's a bunch of
That's
tackling dummies and stuff.
one of those magical moments like what happened in your thing where you actually go, you lower yourself down and then you look through a surface and out the other side is what you would see in the real world.
It's a
in 3D.
parallax. You basically look around objects, you know, if like we were going to do this.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is duplicate, this is why we call it virtual reality, is all of these confluence of technologies are trying to find ways to explore and explain into our visual system of what actually happens in the real world. And the closer we can get to it, the more magical it becomes. And the good news is there's 4 or 5 companies. I mean, Greg at X-Res is certainly one of them. Lytro is doing a lot in this space. We talked about it before. 8i is doing a lot in this space. There's a number of others.
Some cool rendering stuff, you know.
Yeah. And just recently, Facebook announced that they're getting into that game. So they sort of throw down and said, we also believe that normal just video for video's sake that comes from the previous age will not carry us into the future, which is good for all of us. So it's an interesting time to experiment.
Yeah, interesting. Talk about your work with artists, if you can. I mean, I know a lot of it's still under wraps, but you're doing some extraordinary thing with, you know, very, very famous artists.
Well, you know, it's funny. We're kind of realizing there's a common denominator that's running through everything we're doing, and we're trying to make it interactive. You know, it's not like a linear video experience that you just go through and you don't have any impact. So, you know, you look at the bunny, it looks back at you. You know, you look at the light in the museum, it feels real. Everything's, I think the key to what we're trying to do with the next level of VR, taking out a 360 video is, you know, have agency, have interaction, feel like you're in the space. If you look at something, it knows you're there, you know, so the most difficult thing right now is actually putting a human being in that environment, because they don't know you're there. You know, we need AI, and it needs to solve the uncanny valley. So there's so many issues preventing, you know, human interaction in this space right now. But we're solving them bit by bit. You know, right now we've been tasked to build some famous politicians to do speeches next year, which will be not only VR experience, actually, it will be AR, VR, and a live holographic, which is something else that I've been specializing in for a long time, working with a band called the Gorillas, who don't exist. So we had to figure out lots of ways of making them real, you know. So holographic actually is like a nice bedfellow to room scale VR, because you have to have a volumetric character, but the key is the interaction, you know. It's like, how do you make that character aware of you? And that's what we haven't solved. You know, that's what we all need to.
But in a way, that's Maureen and Eric. That's sort of what you were talking about,
They've
right?
solved that,
to
yeah.
some extent, in animation, you've dealt with that, right?
Yeah, and you know, we can get away with stuff, you know, especially when it's a bunny that's looking at you. You know, there's no uncanny valley when there's a cute little cartoon bunny looking at you. But you know, it is a challenge. I mean, we are limited in many ways by what we can do, but in a way, we are guided by the story that we're telling. So we're not putting the viewer in an experience where they have unlimited choices and you could have a million different outcomes. At least for now, our point of view is, let's make sure we have a great story that we know that we can tell well, and kind of maintain control of the spine of that story, and not have it be this branching narrative where there's, you know, unlimited possibilities. And at the same time, bring the viewer into this story and give them the sense that they are a part of it, that it is happening, and that in some sense that it is limitless, but you know, the wizard behind the curtain is actually controlling everything. You know, to me it's a little bit like, in this brand new medium, you know, it's like, let's put story on top and make sure we have a great story, we tell it well, with characters that you can fall in love with. Then let's find a way to invite the viewer into this story, let it play out, just like real life, you know, like that stream is going by and you can step into it or not if you choose, but the stream will keep flowing whether or not you make that choice. And there can be sort of this sense that perhaps the choices that you're making are affecting the story or having something to do with the narrative. But ultimately, we're not branching storylines in what we're doing, which gives us a lot of control over, you know, how flexible the characters have to be. What we are doing, though, is the way we think of it is we're doing branching emotions, so that as a viewer, if a character needs my help, I can make a choice to help them, I can make the choice not to help them. And so they may solve their problem another way, but the story may plow ahead as it's designed to. But what happens is that character now may look at me differently. So as an example, in Asteroids, there's a moment where a character is on their deathbed, and you have an opportunity to essentially defibrillate them to bring them back to life. And if you do that, the character comes back to life, there's a big celebration, the other character who was so worried about his friend dying turns to you and says, "Thank you so much, oh my God, you know, I value you now in a way that I never had before." I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But if you don't choose to help that character, at some point another character in the story will literally rip your hand off and use your hand to like do what has to get done, and that character will come back to life and they'll have the big celebration, and then the other character won't acknowledge you at all. They'll turn to the other robot that ripped your hand off and say, "Thank you so much, I value you." And you're just left in the corner, you know, it's like, oh, I guess nobody likes me anymore. And so that's you can make those choices, but it's not your story, like it often is in a game. You're the hero, you make the choices. Well, I don't think there's a lot I'm going to learn about myself by making choices in a video game, but storytelling, for me, is all about learning about other characters by the choices that they make under pressure, right? And so we can give the viewer, if we can give the viewer that kind of rich storytelling experience where they connect with characters and care about them and empathize them and want them to get what they want, or more importantly, what they need, and they feel like they're a part of that process, then you know, at least today, that's what we think could be a really compelling journey. And then the final thing to point out is, like, even if we've got this story that's finely tuned in our mind, we hope, along the way, the decisions and the choices that the viewer makes that are interactive suggest to them that there are multiple potential outcomes, that their choices do matter. They don't know, they just make a choice, good things or bad things maybe happen. And so for their point of view, just like in real life, you can't play the game of life, you know, you only have one chance, right? And so that's sort of how we're thinking about it.
Wow, oh, that's fascinating. So let's show the aliens clip, but then also, because features are still, you know, in the world where we're in now, those are the biggest sort of, from an economic standpoint, the largest stories. I'd love to talk about this, but also, how many of you have seen The Martian VR? Just an amazing piece of work that you pioneered. Maybe talk about that. How do you create agency within an existing story? So let's start with.
So this piece that Seth is going to show should be watched in a headset. So this is what we call a flatty, right? It's not in a headset version, but it became very popular on YouTube 360 and Facebook 360. It's the same piece of content, so you can see it this way, and Seth will just probably navigate around with his finger as you would in a headset. This is a short little promotional piece that we did to promote the movie Alien Covenant, and then the longer VR piece that we're working on now. And I guess you'll need some sound with it. Might be, if you can pull the lights all the way down, it'd probably be easier to see because it's very dark. It's Alien, so it's dark. Kind of hard to watch with the lights on, but it's okay. You can watch it at home too. Oh, so you're actually looking at it as a 2i version of it.
Yeah, I guess we downloaded.
So you're actually looking at it the wrong way. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it's pretty scary. A friend of mine was telling me that they put their 11-year-old kid in it by accident, and it was a little rough.
Bad idea.
So just try and watch it at the top. This is actually you're kind of really not watching it the right way. So I don't think you need to show it anymore because it's sort of impossible to get what's going on. I can just sort of tell you, but check it out on Facebook 360 or YouTube 360 or in a Gear VR or in a Vive or a Daydream. Or it's across everything, PlayStation and an Oculus Rift if you have one. Essentially, it's from the point of view of the alien, from the inside of the body that it's growing in, and then it pops out, scurries around and attacks one of the characters that plays in the movie, and of course, bad things happen. So it's a pretty interesting, pretty powerful piece of VR, and it went viral, and it's cool. So I recommend you go take a look at it in a VR headset when you can. So that's what we did. That's what we did this week in VR.
And then you had another project with Alien, which was the ODG project as well.
Yeah. So at CES again, while we were doing the other stuff with the volumetric stuff, a company we're involved in doing augmented reality is called ODG, Osterhaus Design Group, out of San Francisco, and they're doing very lightweight, very powerful head-mounted display glasses that allow you to see the real world at the same time as bring in augmented things. And we did an alien sort of memory thing where you're exploring a world, but you see the world around you, so you're kind of in the med bay. And it's an augmented reality experience that we did as a technology experiment. A lot of the things we do are experiments that we take out as sort of provability concept things that eventually will start to become commercialized forms of entertainment. That's a big part of what we do in the lab.
And let's talk about The Martian a little bit.
Sure.
So, and a bunch of you have seen it? Yeah? So that's an extraordinary experience across all platforms. And it's from you're from the perspective of the Matt Damon character, but there's also these sort of, I kind of think of them as rondos, where you're outside of the story actually playing a game in the experience, and then you can kind of stay there. I remember when I first talked to you, I said, how long is the experience? And you said, well, it depends, which is like not a common...
You can't say that with a movie. It's
No,
like,
you
how
can't
long
say
is the
that,
movie?
right?
It doesn't depend.
How long
Is it?
Right. TV shows, yeah. It depends? No. Right. Yeah.
The depends part is because you can choose the amount of interactivity and quote unquote playtime or adventure time that you want to be in it. Eventually it propels you across. So the maximum time you could probably spend into is maybe 32, 33 minutes in the experience. The minimum time, if you literally rush through it, like you rush through a day of life, would probably be 18 to 20 minutes. So there's a gap of probably 10 minutes of extra stuff that you kind of can goof around with. But it's a first-person adventure, right? Which made a lot of sense when we were looking at the book of The Martian and the movie of The Martian. It logically said, well, what are things that are hard to do in real life? Going to Mars is kind of hard to do in real life, so we can do that in virtual reality and bring people into that experience. How do we use the first-person protagonist where you get to play the part? You get to be Mark Watney, and you get to do all the things that you need to do to be rescued. This piece is now a couple of years old, which is interesting. So it's like an eternity in the current state of VR, and we've learned a lot, and we are sort of, we would say from a self-critical standpoint, we've learned so much about what we did right and so much about what we did wrong or didn't really approach in the right ways that we're now taking different swings in different ways. And it's always, I feel it's kind of our mission to always be right on the edge of what ambition will allow you to do. That this is not a time to play it safe. We're not, we're not in a deep monetization zone for any of this anyway. So now is the time to take risks and explore and try new things. So what we're doing now with the longer Alien interactive piece is really exploring the boundaries of that kind of horror storytelling. And the other piece that we're currently working on is a piece based on Planet of the Apes franchise. That is quite a significant swing in terms of how we're going to build a world. And we've shown little pieces of it, so I can tell you the secret is essentially you are an ape. So the moment of inspiration and wow, this is cool, this is something I couldn't do in a movie, is in the Rift or the Vive when you put your hands out and you look at your hands, you see ape hands. And you're like, whoa, okay, so now I'm an ape and I have to think like an ape. And one of the little things we did as part of the experimental joy of all this is I said, well, what would I do if I was an ape? Well, I would do this, I would pound my chest. So they're like, oh, when the developer's like, oh, we could do that. And then a week later, they're like, oh, check it out. So now, when you're an ape, you like, and it makes noise, and you pound your chest like an ape, and you make the guttural noise. And it's like all these little moments that seem a little trite and a little ridiculous if it wasn't in VR, are completely wonderful and magical in VR, because playing that part is something you can't do in the traditional passive media world, but you can do with a plum in this interactive world. So that's what's a lot of fun about it.
Do you have something you want to say, Maureen?
I was just thinking about for Invasion making you a bunny, and we didn't realize what a big deal that was. We were just experimenting and figuring out. But oftentimes in VR, if you're just a floating nothing, you don't necessarily feel there. You're like, what am I supposed to do? What am I? So by giving you a body, I don't think you always have to, but if we did give you a body, then you know what role you're supposed to play, because there's a question of identity within VR, right? Who are you? And by doing exactly what you said, it helps. For our case, for Invasion, by making you a furry bunny, for having a furry bunny body, and people just keep on squatting because it gets really fat, and people enjoy doing that. And then kids especially like to hop around because they have no inhibitions whatsoever. But then it explained why this other bunny is coming to sniff you, because it would make no sense otherwise. And then it also makes sense why you're so short and so close to the ice, so it gives you a different perspective into the world than you normally could. So imagine if you're like an ant or something else like that. So it's cool to get you to actually care about these characters in a different way by making you a character too.
One of the most amazing things, and I have to imagine you've done it too, is in VR, you get to have the easiest, quickest sex change operation ever. Like, there are certain experiences, there are probably 5 or 6 I could point to. One is with this Swiss developer that's been working with this company called Dreamscape that we're also involved in and an investor in. And you get to pick the character you want to play, which I have to imagine everybody here has done this, right? Maybe I'm way out there, like, oh God. So immediately if you get to pick a boy or a girl, you're like, oh, I totally want to be a girl. And they're like, look at that, I'm a chick, and I've got all the body parts, and I'm like, this is awesome. And it's kind of fascinating, right? Do you do that? Do you pick the boy, or do you not?
There's actually a research study in gaming that shows that men
want to be girls,
but that girls want to be girls. So really, people should just make female characters for everything.
There you go. So I'm a total proof case of that. Like, whenever I get the choice, I totally want to be a girl. Like, I'm so fascinated by being a girl.
There was a separate study. I mean, I think it was MIT or something that actually did that early on with like the DK1, and they basically put a DK1 on like a linebacker, and then a separate one on a petite female ballerina, but they switched the video feeds. And suddenly he's seeing her perspective and she's seeing his, and the brain quickly like tries to rationalize it. Suddenly he's lost 100 pounds, and
so he's very dainty.
Yeah, he starts to feel like he's a little waif, and she suddenly feels like she's massive, and the brain quickly tries to like. I mean, that's a whole like psychological study in the application of VR. But I just read that study, and I was just like floored by like.
In a way, it's like the most. It's one of those great indirect case studies of why this is going to be so enormous, right? If people can go into a world where they can be whoever they want to be, free of all of those limitations, there's going to be a tremendous percentage of those people who are not going to ever want to come out and go back into their everyday lives. Let me just show of hands. How many questions do we have? I definitely want to leave room for questions. Okay, well, Mark, why don't you want to?
Sure. Well, I mean, this has been talked about a lot.
Do you want to stand up?
You guys are particularly honing in on the question of empathy and resonating with the characters. been them from afar. And I'm just, one of the things people always say when you go into some of these more compelling experiences in life, it's so real that it affects people, like you were saying. And I feel like a walk, which is the VR experience of walking between the World Trade Towers, so you petite, and they have those in the floor to make it just a little bit more real. I literally could not take it.
Many people couldn't do it.
Yeah, a third of the. Have any of you done this? This is it's actually old now, but it's it's an experience where you, Philippe Petit, you walk between the World Trade Center, and it's actually, when they first did it, you actually walked on a cut hose with a fan behind you. So it was really, but a third of the people cannot even go like 7 steps.
I don't think that's vertigo. I think that's vertigo, not empathy. So, right? Yeah, it's physical, definitely.
I think it's this isn't scientific, but it's your reptile brain, right? It's like kept you alive all these years. It's like, you are not going out on that, It's just, it just speaks to what we really mean when we talk about immersion in VR. I mean, there is a part of your body that completely believes in it. Your intellect doesn't, but because there's so much of your being that does, it makes it a powerful experience. It's much easier to suspend your disbelief and go with the flow, and that's one of the huge powers of VR that makes it special and different from any other medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what I'm driving toward is with these experiences, and I've seen a few. There was a piece last year that was submitted for the Emmys about somebody who's on abduction of a child, whatever.
Lost.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Weaver piece. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just in the current group version of that, it was very emotional. So now you're in this world, you've got aliens, which is bad enough.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah.
I know there's been discussion of evidence of storytelling in VR and things like that. Also, this is touching now on as we get into communal experiences and interact with people in the space. Maybe you guys can address that.
I think what you're starting up might help with that as well in terms of coming up with standards. But I do think for journalism especially, in journalism there is a code of what is crossing the line too much. But I think for VR, at least in the short term, I think eventually everyone gets used to whatever, but at least in the short term, I do think we need to dial things possibly back in, because a lot of the experience are about taking to Syria and all these things, and it makes you care a lot about it, but it can traumatize people, just even kids. So our first version of Invasion, the hawk actually kills the bunny. And the real reason we did this is because we had just started our company and we had 3 weeks to create something for OC2 at the time, and we didn't have enough time to animate the bunny. So Eric thought, we'll just kill it. Yeah. Kill it, and then we won't have to animate anymore. But a mother actually said that she would be afraid to have her kid watch it in the headset, because in a theater, if something like that happened, she would hear the adults laugh at the dark humor, and it would lighten the mood. Or she could turn to her mom and say, "Mommy, what happened?" And the mom could say whatever she wanted. But when you're all alone in that headset,
right,
it could be quite scary. So the good thing is, in the actual Invasion, the full thing, the bunny doesn't get its head ripped off. But that does show how powerful that is, and I do think we do have a responsibility to not shock people too much, because VR tech demos, people want to go there, right? Explore how, the boundaries of VR. So there is temptation to go there, and I think we need to make sure that doesn't happen too much.
Yeah, I think it's an active conversation in the community, because you have a content rating. Is it pornographic or violent or whatever? But there's also an immersion rating, like a roller coaster,
right.
That's going to be very hard on certain people, and so there's a couple of different ratings, matrices you got to have.
They do, and we talked a lot about this and helped sort of advise on it. They call it a comfort rating. So, and everybody has a different sense of comfort. Just like there are people that are very comfortable getting on a boat, and there are some people that are very not comfortable getting on a boat because they get seasick. And it's the same thing with virtual reality. People's inner ear systems are all different, and as you get older, those little hairs in your ears go away, and it actually makes you much more susceptible to motion sickness over time. So it's why young people love roller coasters, and typically as you get over 40, you see the people that love roller coasters goes way down, because it's part of what changes in your body is it's just too intense, because your sense of spatial, you lose some of that. So they're on all the platforms now, there is something called comfort ratings, and they talk about this is a very comfortable, easy experience to handle, or this is a very intense experience, not even just from a content standpoint, but just from a pure mechanics standpoint of how you're moving around in something, or like there's a lot of car simulating type races in VR, and those to me are like the worst of the worst in terms of when you're trying to propel something forward, but your body's not actually being propelled. It's really hard. We subjugate it quite a bit with motion seats and motion chairs. So in The Martian, because there's a whole sequence where you're driving the Mars rover around, for the location-based version and the trade show version, we put it in a D-box seat, and all you're talking about is like a couple of inches of movement in any direction, forward propelling, and your brain starts to believe that, and the threshold of people getting sick went almost down to nothing. Whereas in the normal console version, you have to be a little bit careful when you're driving around on Mars and bouncing around on all the rocks and stuff.
You know what's funny as you're saying that is I'm thinking about what's the most disturbing image of the 70s films. It's probably Clockwork Orange, and it's that.
Yeah, this
right?
thing, yeah.
I never thought about it, but that's the problem with this stuff is you're in this thing and there's no looking away. And I've had that many times at festivals, especially if you're in the industry being polite, you're not going to take the thing off. But something starts to, even just poorly rendered or annoying or whatever, but you've got this sort of emotional hangover for like an hour, you just don't feel quite right. So we have to be careful.
If you put your future goggles on like I do every day, and you actually start to understand where this stuff is going and the level of clarity and believability that's going to happen in the next 5 to 15 years, you're going to look back at what we do today with the box on face scenarios as like the black and white TVs of the 40s in terms of the fidelity dynamics of what is actually coming. So when you actually start building experiences like this, that when you strap in, your visual and limbic systems will be so incredibly stimulated that you will not be able to separate is it actually happening to you or not. Those days are coming. So the idea of trying to get ahead of that and guard against mistakes that can happen, there's definitely a dystopian side of this that is very real and a little bit scary, but we live on the edge of scary, so that's what we do all day long.
I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at Mayo Clinic they were doing some things where they were putting electrodes on the outside of your, behind your ear that would stimulate your inner ear to sort of mimic what your inner ear would experience if you were like
there's a lot of
moving
experiments.
around. And I haven't tried it, but I talked to somebody who did, and they said it actually was very effective. Have you tried it?
It works. Yeah.
They said it was a little annoying.
Well, it buzzes on your these lobes right here, but it fools you into believing that you've actually propelled forward or propelled up or down. And it's a pretty fascinating work of study.
Kevin.
Question. In film storytelling, whether it was traditional film or animated film, having a film or a project where you're able to both laugh from it and cry from it is often a sign of that's a good film. So, for example, in Toy Story 3 or Up or even Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and all these movies, you have some visual effects that happen where you actually can laugh from it, but there are also scenes where you can cry. Are we at the point where we've done some VR where is there a VR project where you actually have been able to cry and laugh in the same project? Okay.
Definitely the crying part.
Not crying from, oh my God, this was so scary, I didn't want to.
No, not crying for scary.
But just probably because you're emoting for something that's happening.
I'll tell you about the thing that made the most impact for me at Tribeca, and I'm curious if any of you have seen it. It was a piece called, I want to say, Draw Me Close, or Drawn Close Together, something like that. And it was a very, very simple artistic medium piece, very cartoony line drawing type stuff. And they had an actual actress wearing a very simple mocap suit with a couple of lighthouses in the Vive, and you're in a child's bedroom, and it's a very serious story because the woman is an abused woman, so it's an abusive relationship, and you play the part of the young boy, and you're in this like completely artistic cartoon style world, and the woman starts to tell the story, and you play the part of the little boy, and to the point of the motion dynamics, like you instantly become a boy. Like when they tell you and you see yourself as a little 8-year-old boy, your body and your brain starts to become an 8-year-old boy. And then she comes over, she starts telling the story, and you hear her through your headset, and you know that she's there because you see a cartoon version of her. She comes over and gives you a hug, And man, the waterworks just like, oh my gosh, like this is an artistic medium that is now connected to me body to body, like an actual hug. And it was completely unbelievable. So if you ever get a chance to see it, it was Draw Me Close.
And they have a real
you done
person
it?
that hugs
It was
you,
amazing, right?
A real person.
A real
hugs you,
actress is playing the part.
while there's also a virtual
Correct.
character hugging you.
Yeah, so
you
that
really
it's,
feel it.
for sure you guys need to see it, because from a storytelling standpoint with animation, imagine if you could create, in what you're doing with Rainbow Crow, characters that could actually do this, like, and you would feel it.
You just need to get a free bunny with every.
Yeah, exactly.
Every very
So that was, the emotional side of it was blending the art forms together of like theater and immersion and artistic and technology. It all sort of came together in this magical moment for me and many other people that did it. That was the cry part.
What was the one that we, were you here? One of you guys was here. VR Playhouse showed that Holocaust
Yeah.
survivor on the boat.
It's very powerful.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So Tom Hanks was the narrator on it, and it's this whole, like, whenever you get into historically really difficult subjects to tackle, and you start putting that into this spatial immersive medium, it brings it so close to home. It was extraordinarily powerful. The other piece that has been showing was Gabo's piece around the UN with the Holocaust.
He was going to
survivor.
be here tonight. He just couldn't make it. Yeah.
It's also amazing. It's
The Last Goodbye.
Yeah, The Last Goodbye, and it's spatial. They do volumetric capture, and they capture. There's not many Holocaust survivors left. They're all in their like mid to late 90s now, and they've captured a couple things. USC did a thing with augmented, with artificial intelligence that's amazing, and they also did this piece with the UN where you literally go into the concentration camps and you go into the gas chambers and you go into the areas where you see all the shoes from all the people that were killed. And it's like, there's nothing in a movie that could ever take you to that level of emotional connectedness, and it's extraordinarily powerful. Like, it's really serious, important work that's being used in spatial medium in a way that's really powerful.
Yeah, stand up, please.
Oh, I didn't know it was you, Frank. Sit down.
I want to thank you guys for taking us beyond the technology into the emotional, because really that's what movies and TV are really about, is the emotion. So I want to thank you for that. This film is so much better than my panel's going to be tomorrow. If only there was like a white paper that we could download.
He's a plant.
Why, thank you, Frank. Did you have a question?
Where do we get this white paper? Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
So far, what's been your biggest challenge being in this industry, and how have you overcome it?
Wow.
Whoa, big question.
Yeah.
Question of the night.
I think there's a ton of hype for VR. So every single new technology, there's the hype, trough of disillusionment, hockey stick up, and trying to time those points accurately is very difficult. And as for us, we're a startup, means that we have to time it with a bit of luck and forecasting and whatnot as accurately as possible to put out the right thing at the right time. So, for example, I think that a lot of people say interactivity is the only way to go, or there's this desire to define what VR is right now. And I think that's because the VR industry really sometimes I feel the VR industry is a little insecure and really wants to be like, this is what we are about and this is how we're different. But if you're just confident in what VR is about, then you don't feel a need to say, it's only 360, it's only interactive, it's only film, it's only, like, VR is gonna revolutionize every single industry, education, right, to be able to actually go see the dinosaurs, medicine, even the way you browse, right? Right now we do it on a flat screen and we use a file folder structure to simulate a cabinet. What if in VR it's an actual cabinet? Like, we don't know. It's gonna do everything. So I feel it's too early to define things, but there's a need to do it right now just so that we can all show how great we are to help with the hype. But I actually think that hyping it too much is not good, because it creates these false expectations so that when the numbers don't actually meet expectations and everyone thinks that VR is not really here, it's not. We all are predicting this trough. It's like, I need there to be less hype so that we can actually get to work and actually creating the content that will actually help us get out of the trough, and maybe less marketing and more just doing the work.
We talked about this when I interviewed you for that thing, right? You talked about the winter. Eric, you talked about the winter of VR.
Yeah,
Is it right?
a lot of people it's sort of winter of VR happening, or we're going into it. I think a lot of people are thinking it's that trough. Like, when are we going to come out of it, or how are we going to come out of it? And I think there's a sort of a balance, because I love the medium and I'm very bullish on it. But I'm also sober, and I actually like sitting next to Ted because he's just so excited about the whole thing, and it sort of like gives me new energy. It's just such a cool medium. You can do so much, but there's a lot of challenges in making it and creating. The toolkit isn't quite there, and the consumer is not quite there. The headsets are a little clunky. It's inherently a problematic medium in all ways.
The way that they all are at first, right? Same way television was, same way the internet was.
Despite all of those warts, it's amazing. It just gives you a storytelling medium that's unlike anything else, and that's exciting. And but the problem is, you meet, and Ted probably meets way more than I do, but you get these people that come in and they want the holodeck, and they want to be there today. And just the reality is, it's a much more limited medium in that sense, but what it is capable of is amazing. And so it's that balance of being super excited about what it's capable of, but not over-promising it or trying to promise the hype, because the hype, I think, it's done us sort of a disservice.
Well, and what I try and do, agreed, unbridled enthusiasm is sort of my stock of trade. It's just who I am. My biggest challenge to your question is, I'm always trying to ask everybody that I work with, whether it's the studio folks or people in the industry or people that I interface with, whether I'm doing a project with them or not, on look at the longest possible lens on this issue that you possibly can think of. Give yourself 10 years, which is hard from a business standpoint. It's really hard for Maureen and Eric because they're running a startup that is trying to accomplish a goal. But even in their minds, because we've talked to this, none of this is really going to find its true home in the next 18 months. To your point, there's lots of challenges with what the medium can do today, but if you can visualize your way to a 10 or 15 year sort of horizon and know other industries and kind of look at other industries that have taken what it takes to really get to a full level of complete sophistication, it's going to take that long.
Yeah.
And because there's so much interest in it, we tend to be a little too like, all this is going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is not really tomorrow. It's going to take many, many cycles of this technology and many cycles of artists and creators and people thinking about all this to actually achieve the ultimate objective of what this can be when you get to sort of what we would call kind of the end game, where we sort of are with television and movies today. Like, there's still always new challenges to create and new ways to accomplish goals, but the medium is sort of fully there, right?
Yeah.
We're not even close to fully there.
And I think all the mediums go through this, and I think VR just needs to be given that time to mature. Like film, the first films were late 1800s, but the first sound film wasn't until 1930 or something. And so, that's 40 years minimum just to get sound in film. And so you have to give VR, hopefully not that long, but you have to give it a similar kind of maturity curve. It's got to come into its own.
I have a quick question on that for any of you. If the Ready Player One, when that happens, is that potentially an inflection point? How many of you have read Ready Player One? So that's pretty powerful vision.
Read it?
No,
I am. It's required reading.
Is that potentially something that ignites? I guess the technology will see what the technology is, but if people get a sense of that, I guess that's a no. Other questions? Yeah, Phil.
So much of VR is sad, serious, or horror. Have any of you seen good examples of comedy that are funny primarily because they're in VR?
That's the tough part, is the primarily because it's in VR. Everybody else want to talk?
Actually, no. We've been talking about comedy with various Google, John, everyone's no one's really tried it. And if they have tried it, they have certainly not succeeded. I used to work with a comedy company, actually.
Invasion's comedy.
Well, come on, that's not comedy. That's
comic.
Totally
drama.
Hilarious.
I was touched by that. No, I didn't laugh out loud.
But both.
You're very funny, but not. I don't know about your films. No, it's like Ali G. There's no Ali G. There's no, The Office. There's no. It just hasn't happened yet. I think it's an untapped genre, actually.
I think it's totally doable. I think there's no reason why I can't. I think.
What about the accounting?
Accountant. I think doing serious stuff is in a way easier because then you can get PR off of the topic itself rather than just the VR quality. So I think it's easier to go that way, but there's no reason why comedy can't be done.
Well, I can give you
need more people do it.
I can give you certainly a couple of touch points. We did a piece a couple years ago, 360 video piece, but good. The Sony in Philadelphia guys did a very funny comedy piece that you can get on Gear VR. It's out there. It's actually quite hysterical because it's those guys doing it. And it's actually funny and good. And then to me, the funniest part of the whole thing is watching Danny DeVito with this stripper eating a popsicle, and it's like you cannot stop looking at it like the whole time. It's actually really hysterical to just watch them do that. It's just like the show. There are two pieces. One of them actually is a really important piece in the evolution of all this. It's called Job Simulator. And Job Simulator, the company Alchemy just got bought by Google because they're always like, they see something really going like Toothbrush, like, we better get that right now. And it's quite comical. It's very funny, and you're in this job. It's like The Office, except in VR, and you're basically totally active, and you're living the world of Job Simulator.
Actually, Rick and Morty.
Yeah, the new one's the Rick and Morty thing.
Yeah. So I forgot about that.
So there's comedy out there.
So there is one or two.
Yeah, another one. That's great. Yeah, virtual reality. There's lots of things. Then there's the Tyler Hurd stuff, the chocolate piece, which is this irreverent, funny, goofy. There's a good amount of fun, just fun for fun's sake in VR.
That was one of your favorites. The Tyler Hurd thing was one of your favorites, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, Seth, I'm going to have to
catch the
make
plane.
my departure. I have a plane that I may make.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Good.
There's a piece called Notes on Blindness, which is really cool.
It's really good.
If you have access.
Have you seen Notes on Blindness?
I am going to take off, so I'll let you guys continue. Okay. But thank you so much for having me.
Fine.
Sorry to leave early.
I know there's a piece which makes you a woman who gets sexually harassed to see what it's like for that. I'm excited to see that.
That'd be awesome.
Just go to Upload VR, apparently.
Awesome.
Oh! No, they're my friends. Sorry.
Too soon? I don't know.
Was that too soon, that joke?
Too soon?
What's wrong with you guys?
Did that answer your question?
I guess so.
I'll prove you.
Yeah, next.
Yeah.
In the back, yeah, please. We can't hear you, sir. Can you repeat?
It's a slightly different process, I think, for each project. But yeah, I mean, there's a kind of a script or a creative document. Usually, more interactive. It might be more of a game design document if it gets really technical and around interactivity. But yeah, it starts usually with a script. Depending on if it's a branching narrative, you might have to do like some sort of like outline or diagram of how that works. But I think most of the projects I've seen at least start there from some sort of creative treatment.
We always try and ask, in a very candid way with all the people that we work with, and we've all had this conversation, is why is this better in virtual reality or augmented reality? Why does this actually make sense? Would it be better in a flat screen? Are you better off telling this story in a traditional media way? What makes it so compelling in VR that I would rather watch it in VR or AR than watch it on a traditional media form? And that's something that we're always kind of lensing against and pricking on as hard as we can to find that moment where, why does it make sense to do it here versus there?
I'm going to disagree, not because I actually disagree, but because it's more fun
to
have disagreement. So Shakespeare was great in theater, right? It was great to be read. It's great in film. It's great in animated film. Lion King is basically that, and I'm sure it's great in VR. So we believe that VR is yet just another storytelling medium with its own set of tools for creators to be able to tell stories. So I don't think that certain stories cannot be told in VR, but like how do you take advantage of the tools of VR to tell this story in a better way in VR than you could in 2D, if that makes sense. Yeah. Also, for the process, I think every director is different. So Glenn Keane doesn't do scripts. He does everything by storyboarding. He's a visual storyboarder. Eric does write, but when he writes out his script, he starts off from the viewpoint of who you are. It's like you are experiencing this, so that's slightly different. Also, if you do have interactive with narrative, merging film culture and game culture is very difficult. I actually come from games. I was at Zynga, and I headed up the Farmville franchise for 6 years, and so trying for that with the agile Scrum process versus the traditional animation, which tends to be a waterfall process, getting those two things to work together is very different. And then even culturally, I thought game people were high maintenance, man. I'm kidding. But yeah, we did have to adapt a lot of different processes and have the game people learn the film stuff, film people learn the game stuff, and I tell them, get rid of your baggage, think about this in a completely new way. Sometimes I actually like getting fresh grads who have never been in film or games because they approach it completely differently.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of tools for like pre-vising stories now, so you can actually pre-vis your story in VR before you actually commit a lot of production dollars. A lot of times we go through like a storyboarding phase where we'll do like the 16:9 frame of like the hero shot, but then we'll like do a top-down like almost diorama, north, south, east, west, and what's in each quadrant of the frame. And so I think to Maureen's point, it's different for every creator, I think.
So true and good to your point, because it made me think of one of my favorite pieces in VR is this piece called Pearl, which I think works tremendously well in virtual reality, especially in spatial virtual reality and a Vive, because you can you're in a car the whole time and you can pop your head out the sunroof and lean out the door and do all this stuff. But it also works great as a traditional piece of media, and ultimately was nominated for an Academy Award and all this, because it's just a really, really good story that's extraordinarily emotionally connected, right? So it's why I'm so enthused about what you guys are doing, is you're in that same track of building these incredibly emotional and good storytelling that can carry on to multiple mediums. But Pearl to me was slightly, if not significantly better in virtual reality than it was watching it on the flat screen, simply because I felt like I was more present. I felt like I was more there and more connected with the daughter and the father that are going through this journey, because I felt like I was with them. But it did work outside of it too, just not as well.
I mean, I think a key issue is not thinking about it in filmmaking terms. Ted mentioned it earlier, it's like a flatty. It's not a flatty. You're either in a spherical system or you're in an immersive multi-room system. So, think of it as the difference between going to a theater and you're sitting in a seat and watching a proscenium stage play, or you're in something like Sleep No More, which is a 100,000 square foot disused hotel with 80 actors in different rooms, and you're free to move. That's the difference. It's a seismic shift. It's not a little bit different, it's entirely different. So if you start thinking of it in terms of, I'm going to write a film and I'm maybe going to get into VR, it's just a different thing altogether.
Have any of you done Sleep No More? Some of you? I would highly encourage it if you go to New York City. It's great, though.
It stressed me out. I was like, where am I supposed to be? Where are my friends? What floor am I supposed to be? What's happening? But that's probably because I'm a control freak.
That's your personality.
And there's horrible bunny rabbit.
Sleep No More is absolutely something you should do. Yeah. If you're planning on working in this medium, do some escape rooms. Go visit some escape rooms. That's an important trope to actually understand. See a lot of theater. Read a lot of novels.
Yeah.
It's like
Ready Player One,
Yeah.
Snow Crash.
Yeah.
There's a whole reading list.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a few more. Robert, is that Fixer? Okay.
So first of all, the six of you, including Eric, are going to be early entrants into the VR Hall of Fame. And on that note, can you talk about platforms? We heard a little bit about IVR, which is evolving. Can you talk a little bit more about where you see that going and what we should pay attention to?
The volumetric side of things, specifically. Well, I think
Maybe define volumetric, because both of you and Peter talked about it, but how many of you understand the concept of, maybe explain it a little bit?
So very simply, imagine if we took a picture of this, a video of this with a normal camera, it would have a plane, it would have an existence that was what was captured by that sensor at that moment, right? And if you tried to lean into it or walk into it, it wouldn't change. Whereas in the world of volumetric, right, there's a number of different techniques you can do it. You can scan things, you can capture things, but essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to triangulate pixels. So you're using multiple cameras, typically in stereo pairs, and sometimes using LiDAR. We use a LiDAR, which is a very fast sort of radar system that actually tells where things are in space. But you're basically trying to define everywhere where your visual system can see as an actual physical point in space. Just like in the real world, I know roughly how far I am away from you, and if I got up off the stage and walked over there, everything would change, because every pixel in my view would change because I got half as close to you. It's hard to do that with live action video. It's actually relatively simple to do that with CGI, with spatial pixels because it's volumetric by nature. It's actually a voxel, right? So what we're doing, and 5 or 6 other companies are doing, and there'll likely be 50 or 100 by the time we're all done with this journey, is trying to figure out how to be able to make video into something that is truly spatial. So that I could, sometime in the future, I could stand here and if I wanted to walk up to you in virtual reality and it wasn't CGI, you were a real person, I could do that. And eventually I could do it live. So a lot of the examples people give are at sporting events. Today I can put a camera at a sporting event and just be on the sidelines and look back and forth like this. But if I could sort of teleport myself to the holodeck discussion of being behind the quarterback, being over the quarterback, looking sort of from his viewpoint or the tackler's viewpoints or the coach's viewpoint, and move around the field and experience the game that way, that would be pretty transformational. So that's sort of the dreams of volumetric capture.
I mean, some of the technology for capturing the environments is actually quite old. Greg, who we were talking about earlier, he's been doing this for 20 years. David Fincher used photogrammetry in Fight Club, for example. So that technology is very, established, and it's just finding a new home in VR. The really brand new technology is trying to capture a person, and volumetrically capturing a performance. That's very much in its infancy. So there's like Uncorporeal and ATI have these video volumetric capture systems where it's the opposite of a VR camera. You're in a dome full of cameras facing in, and they stitch you together from every angle. And the fidelity's not quite there. They can't do hair. They can't do all sorts of basic things that you need to capture a performance. But it's okay for now. But that's the real challenge, I think. I think we figured out how to capture environments, but we haven't figured out how to capture people yet.
I think it's sort of a different tack in terms of platform or the HMDs themselves, the headsets. Like right now is very much sort of first generation, and I think I'm very excited to see what 3rd, 4th, 5th generation headsets look like. I think at the end of the year, the first self-contained headsets should be on the market. I think that's going to be a pretty big shift in the landscape, because you're no longer going to be tethered, which is kind of a big drawback right now to some of the more room scale apparatuses. I think those headsets will just become more and more powerful, wireless, self-contained, what's called inside-out tracking, and full what's called 6DoF, 6 degrees of freedom. Right now, a lot of the Gear VRs and the mobile headsets are what's called 3DoF. So you're kind of limited just to rotating in place, but you can't actually move laterally. And so those headsets will mature here in the next year. And so that's pretty exciting. That just opens up a lot of opportunity.
Have you guys done any?
Well, platform, I was just going to say, we haven't really talked about AR actually much. Sure. Yeah, and I think, if we're going to talk about future platforms, I think mixed reality, or XR, I think is the new terminology, which is all the R's. So get rid of all that. That's going to be very powerful, and I think, it's going to operate on every mobile phone with inside-out tracking. The new Google Pixel phone will have inside-out tracking from September the 1st. Apple, we hope, will have some inside-out tracking. So, the problem that's been holding up VR on many levels is adoption. If 400 million people have cell phones with inside-out tracking, that's an audience we can sell content to. So I think that's a big platform play for us in the next few years.
So even though mobile is by far the most ubiquitous, accessible platform, and Samsung went to the effort of even giving away free Gear VRs with all their S7 phones that were sold, but that wasn't enough to make VR a big thing. So I have to believe it's not really just the form factor or how powerful the phone is. I believe that it's just there's not enough content yet. Because there needs to be, let's say there's like 10 really good pieces of VR. You watch those 10 pieces, you're done. What's going to get you to repeatedly put the phone, put the headset on your head over and over is repeatability. That's going to give you either have large scale, a lot of people buy the stuff at a low price point, or you have high price point and people buy it once, or there's repeatability of that. But if there's no reason for you to come back repeatedly and watch it over and over, there's not going to be a business model, which means that companies run out of money and all that stuff. So there needs to be killer app, there needs to be more content and reasons for you to come back every single week. Like I have to be excited that next week when I come, there's going to be 10 more new awesome experiences for me to see every week. What? Oh.
Is that an argument for episodic, which is really what transformed TV? I mean, is that, I don't know. Is that, anybody ever, I know that you and I talked about that, but episodic, yes, no?
We are making our content episodic. The pro of that is you can, put one out this week, next week to get people to come back. The one con of it is if I put something out now, I know that if another headset comes out tomorrow or a week later, there'll be even more eyeballs. And then they wouldn't have seen the first one, or it's offered on a different headset or all that. So it is a little more complicated. But yes,
so
I'm totally
we need
proponent.
OTT VR.
Yeah, it gets into like the pricing model too, because then are you pricing per episode or pricing for the whole season?
I guess that's a separate panel, but it's really interesting. Ben, is that Ben back there? Yes, Dennis.
Thank you guys again. I don't know if it's possible if you can articulate it this way, but when you talk about the stories that are right for VR, is there a way to abstract it and say, right, like Shakespeare works across mediums, but we know that some stories don't work in VR, or even some of these other platforms. Is there a way that you can kind of frame that and say, well, what's this piece over here, that piece over here? I don't know if there's like a scale.
I think it's too early to really define.
Yeah, I think we haven't figured out we know the power of VR, but right now it's like early film days where it took decades to figure out cuts, pans, zooms, all that stuff. So we're still in discovery phase, which is why everyone needs to just be experimenting with what is a cool thing. So you can look at it different lenses of identity, comfort, safety, to gestures, how intuitive is it? So for example, I could say, one of the really cool things about VR is that it feels like real life. But after doing a first-person shooter for long enough, my arms get tired when I'm just doing this all the time. There's a reason why the Xbox controller was created like this. It's to maximize your ability to not move and be able to do it forever, right? But which then lets company make lots of money. But so then you think about but if I have a controller, it puts an interface and barrier between me and the stuff that's happening, which takes away from the immersion. So I don't really know what my point was, other than that I don't know. Some people is like, oh, it's the physicality of VR that's really cool. But then one could say, I don't want to get that tired and keep my arms up and shoot all the time, right? So I guess I just don't know yet how to answer that question.
I think I would probably just say, because we're starting to see it now, is good craftsmanship and good authorship will win the day. Yeah. Like, it's no different than any other hit-driven medium, is that this is a creative medium, just like books and movies and music and cinema and, doesn't matter. I think that when you start to see things that people put a tremendous amount of energy and have a very, very strong point of view, whether it's right or wrong, those are the things that are the breakthrough pieces. It's an interesting thing, and it's a bit of an odd, this would be an odd thing to say, it's a bit of an odd counterpoint, because I actually, similar to your agree and disagree simultaneously, I totally agree with Maureen that there's not enough content out there, but to put more of a point on it, there's not enough extraordinarily good content out there, where people have actually put a tremendous amount of time and effort like a Pixar movie or a big tentpole movie or an important television show or an important franchise game into VR, because it's just a little too nascent within the marketplace right now. So a lot of people have very limited budgets, and there's a lot of people trying a lot of things, but most of the stuff is sort of unmemorable right now, which is unfortunate, because there's actually a lot of stuff out there, but nothing that you would sort of call, this is something important enough to make an event out of. This is something important enough to really pay attention. I think at some point we'll start to get into a mode where there'll be like one piece, maybe two pieces a month that will actually become like lightning rods. Like, you must see this piece. Like when that little moment of Notes on Blindness and everybody nodded and we all, because Notes on Blindness was one of those moments for all of us in VR that are actually living in this world. It was an important, valuable piece. And, you know, to the, you like The Martian, we think it was an important, valuable touchstone piece. Invasion is an important piece. It actually crossed many chasms of these potential disillusionment moments where Maureen was able to get it on lots of platforms and lots of eyeballs, and a lot of people talk about it and pay attention to it, and then they went on to build other things. So I think that more than anything, the medium itself and the creativity of the medium is going to mature, and you're going to find the superstars of VR through the people that are actually putting a tremendous amount of effort into it. And I like to point to things that I think are interesting, like we were talking about a project that was just released on Oculus called Wilson's Heart. It is not perfect by any means, but it is actually a very important piece in understanding a lot of the storytelling mediums and interactivity mediums and the art style and the effort that they put into this. It's a tremendous effort, and it's about 10 to 12 hours of gameplay in VR, which is a kind of, it sets a new bar. So that's kind of my theory on it.
Great. Well, awesome. Last one. Fixer.
Yeah, it was kind of answered, kind of going back and asking it or not, but one of the problems of making great content, as you said, it takes budgets and a lot of time and energy. Is this a luxury of the funded larger companies? How do independent creators expect to be able to play in this arena, or should we just wait until the trough is over? At some point, it's going to take effort and time, bigger teams to make better stuff. Volumetric's hard to go and tackle that, even on a photogrammetry level, on your own. You need different skill sets, you need different art, you need different talents.
So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what you guys say, but so what the really cool, interesting thing about this is that in many ways, fidelity actually doesn't matter to the success of a project in virtual reality and augmented reality now. I'll point to a piece that's become very popular in the gaming sector called Superhot. It's all about really smart physics and really smart sort of, when you move, it moves, but it is not a high fidelity experience. It's just a well-crafted experience. So they put their money into making something that was really compelling, as opposed to something that tried to be photoreal. And I think, you know, Job Simulator is another one. It's catchy, it's fun, it's fairly low fidelity, because it's, the art style actually plays into it. So I think if you have a limited budget, you can focus on the strengths of the medium, which are give it lots of interactivity, give it lots of playfulness, give it really, really good physics, and you have a chance of winning. Whereas if you try and do something that goes against the grain of that and try and make something that looks amazing on a limited budget, you'll probably fall flat.
Yeah, I think it'll come down to the idea. Like, I think Notes on Blindness, I think I would put in that same group, that if you know how it was made, it's actually a very rudimentary piece, like from like a technical stuff, but the idea was just brilliant.
So solid,
it was just really, really solid. And so I think it'll come down to the idea and matching that with, you know, your financial ability or your technical capability to pull it off. But at the end of the day, the idea is what wins over fidelity or, you know, AI or these other things that a lot of people are trying to play with. But if the core idea is strong, I think that's what's going to win.
I think the issue is right now we're in TV terms, we're in pilot season. You know, everyone's making the pilot and no one's getting the commission for the series, which, you know, I'm from a TV background, so if I just made pilots, I'd be out of business. You know, so in TV, I want the 26 episode commission, but there isn't anyone to give you that. You know, so everyone's making these incredible forays into the storytelling and the content, but there's no buyer to take that into a commercial framework. So I think that needs to happen at some point, but we haven't got the market for that right now.
I think it's really hard right now for indie developers, though it's totally doable. You can get sources of funding so we raised 31 million to make sure we last through the entire job. So that's why we did that. And so there's venture capital, but venture capital hates funding content in general, so that's hard. You can ask the HMDs, they will fund projects, Oculus, Google, whatnot, because they're in the interest, they see the problem that I was just saying before, there's not enough content for to be a business for them, there needs to be reasons for people to go to their platforms, which is content. So they will potentially give money for a project that they think will get people onto their platforms. And then there's also always service-based work, which is a great way to go because it's learning on someone else's dime.
Yeah.
And there's huge amounts where advertising, not necessarily always the sexiest, but brands right now are crazy. They just want to get into VR. There's, the New York Times VR app, they're saying that as many people watch the journalism VR things as watch like the BMW VR commercial because it's fun and exciting. So you can always go to brands and ask them if you could do a commercial for them. So even though it's not your own IP, at least you're learning about VR, like what are the camera angles, like all that type of stuff, and learning on someone else's time.
Yeah. All right, I think that's it. Please give these guys a great hand. That was fantastic. Good job.
Good job.